So, welcome to another episode of Arrays of Living. And it's one of my favorite episodes. It's with a guest. I have a guest, and her name is Zeina Kronfol. Am I saying that right?
Zeina Kronfol. Yeah.
Okay, I said it right. Yeah. And the topic for today is taking a self-healing journey to fulfillment. And we are going to talk about that. But before we do, let me have Zeina introduce herself to you. So Zeina, take it over and introduce yourself, and then we're going to dive into the topic.
Awesome. My name is Zeina. I am an ICF certified career transitions coach, consultant, and founder of C-Rock Coaching. I am coming to you with over 12 years of cross-functional leadership in international product marketing, brand strategy, and product management. So just to get those little things out of the way. But yeah, I'm focusing on career transitions coaching. And I work with 3 different types of people with that. So I'm sure we'll get into it.
Well, one of the things I'm going to ask you about right off the bat is what is cross-functional, because my audience is typically young adults. We do get the older, but just as they're not yet quite in their full career, it might be a new term for them. So what is cross-functional?
Yeah, so cross-functional is basically just getting your hands in a lot of different things, right? So
wearing a lot of hats.
Yes, exactly. Wearing a lot of hats is typically what it's called. So you're always doing something different. Like I worked with, just because I was in marketing, I was always working with pretty much every other team that was out there all over the world. So that's cross-functional, just kind of all over the place.
And another thing I'm going to ask you about is I'm not a big label person. I like to just see people as they are. I don't really care about putting a label. But one of the things you mentioned was millennial women. Yes. So what is, you're going to have to explain that even to me. What is a millennial? That's a certain age, right? Or something?
Yeah. So I've noticed I work with anyone. I don't have any discrimination. I don't really care.
No, don't use that word. I wasn't even down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, no, it doesn't really matter who comes in with me, but when I think of different generations, I think of, or at least how they're talked about in corporate, or they're always talking Gen Z and boomers and this and that.
I never get it, but anyway.
Yeah, those different terms, if you think about it, like the millennials are the ones who are pretty much the only, I can't remember if the one right above it, they also lived without internet, but they were the ones that grew up and internet maybe around the time that they were in college, or are like the ones that knew, they're the last generation really that knew a life, potentially, depending on how old they are, that knew a life prior to the internet. So if you can imagine the people who only lived with the internet as opposed to not, and everything in between, it's very different what they, their values and how they show up and everything.
So what kind of healing what is their healing different from anybody else? Or like their needs, you know what I mean, in terms of healing? Is it different from anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost just, it's interesting because they're caught between 2 worlds, right? So many of them knew what it was like. So many of them maybe grew up playing outside, and you were told, come in when the street lights come on, and there were no limitations. And then now and they didn't have internet until maybe they were way older, or like social media, for instance. So they got on social media, and when they were on social media, even though maybe they were taking risks because they were in college, they, quickly, they didn't have, a whole 20 years of social media. Their mom made them an Instagram account, and they've grown into it and almost like grown up in the eyes of the world potentially. So kind of toying between those 2 worlds, whereas the younger generation, they might think like, oh, it's you have it so easy, you have so many more opportunities, as opposed to older generations who felt like they didn't have any opportunities because they didn't know of any of their opportunities. They only knew with what was within their community, or who they could maybe call on a phone. So it's kind of caught between 2 worlds of, I know what my heart is telling me that I should be doing, but society or how I was raised is very different. And then it also comes, there's many different layers to that as well. If you are, an immigrant or a child of immigrant parents, there's all sorts of additional conditioning that happens there as well. So millennials are just, it's fun because they have both, they have a little bit of insight into both worlds. Sometimes they lean heavily into either or, but it's really just that being caught between the different worlds and wanting to be like Gen Z, for instance, or the younger generations and follow their heart and their dreams. And also having that voice in their ear of, no, you can't do that. That's not practical. Don't follow your heart. This is what you have to do. Life is hard, you know, all of that.
So let's jump into because I'm still really curious about what problems they present. You know, what type of problems do they present, or what I call, so in my book Aladdin Carpets, I call out this thing I call shites.
Yeah.
So that's stuff harbored inside that eventually sabotages, and it's really things we get handed when we were children without choice. And then as we became adult, we got handed this, and we didn't know we really got handed it, but we're carrying it. Think of it carrying on your back, you know, Atlas with the world on his back. And is guiding how you're thinking, the decisions you're making, but you're not even fully aware that's what's guiding it, because you didn't open up that sack to say, what shite did I get that I really don't want? And what shite did I get that I'm really grateful for and thankful and I'm going to keep? And what am I going to discard and now replace amazing things with? So I'm curious, what are they presenting for healing that you're seeing that might be different from someone that, say, is a Gen Z or a baby boomer? You know what I mean? I'm trying to understand that.
Yeah. So it's really, I love that description. I've actually had that come to me, that exact image come to me in a meditation, which is amazing. But it's essentially with that, I mean, that's such a beautiful visual. So it's essentially how much you're carrying and how long you're carrying it.
Yes.
So younger generations, they are operating in a space where mental health, there's more mental health awareness and access, as opposed to people who were older, which maybe had zero mental health awareness and access. And maybe even now, if they were told about it, they're just shut down to it. They don't understand that. They say, what is the point of us talking about this? So it's really kind of like it's very linear in that way of how much are you carrying and for how long. So what I'm seeing is the younger generations have this awareness I hear, you know, people in their teens talking about their traumas.
Yeah.
And then I'm laughing, thinking about, oh my gosh, you know about the word trauma that young? Like, I'm just now like twice your age, you know, working through my own things. So I think it's a matter of the acceptance and the understanding, and releasing that stigma. You know, there was always such a stigma when it came to mental health. If you were going to see a therapist at some point, you didn't tell anyone about it. It was a secret because it was very taboo and people didn't want to, you know, to talk about it. It was embarrassing to feel or to have people think like, oh, something's wrong with me, or I can't handle it. Whereas now people, you know, it's almost like, why don't you have a therapist? You need to talk to someone about this.
Well,
you know?
And I think it's the way this whole thing was postured, right? Like I have 15, 20 years of healthcare experience behind me. And I think, again, goes back to me saying I hate labels. I really, really hate labels.
Yeah.
All of us have mental health at some point in our lives. It's just we handpick which ones we deem to be the ones that need mental health therapy versus the thing that happens that we don't give mental health therapy to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or we give them this circular thing that, oh, going, you know, like grief is one I always talk about, depending on who died, right? The workforce, for example, is, oh, you lost that person, go and take 3 days off, bury them, come back, and you're ready to go.
Yeah.
And you know what? Sometimes that is not the case. Like I always say to people, if my mother passed away, nobody's telling me to go 3 days and bury her and come back. I ain't coming back because I need time.
Yeah.
I'm in recovery. And that means whether it's a mental situation, an emotional, it doesn't matter. I'm in recovery, and I will put myself in recovery in terms of my mental state to understand that I need to go through now a process, right? To get over that. We don't do that with certain things. And then with other things, we put this label, but all of us go through those types of in recovery needs and moments, right? And I think mental health has been one of those that it has become this, you know, it's just like anxiety. I have anxiety. we all have anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
The biggest thing, because I'm very careful with labels that I use, especially with myself too, because you don't want to, I think in the US, we really own these labels, or these
Yes,
labels become us. Like in a way, it's like sometimes the diagnosis is helpful in that it makes you feel like seen, or almost like, oh, okay, so there's a word for this. But then, so it's like, say, just with anxiety, for instance, you're constantly feeling that. And then someone says, oh, it's because you have, anxiety or PTSD or
yes.
something. So in a way, it's almost a sense of relief. But then sometimes and this is the whole system that's involved in this and society, sometimes we take it a step further and then we start, becoming that label. So it's like,
Exactly.
oh, I can't do that. I'm an anxious person. I don't do that.
Exactly.
So it's
Exactly.
really, it's understanding if you're okay with that, having that label, that's fine, but do not let that label,
Define you.
define you,
Yes.
because otherwise then all you're going to be is just you and your anxiety. And then it gets to a point, and this is, I see this with older generations as well. Like, so for instance, if you're someone who's constantly struggled with pain, and there's an opportunity for you to see, some specialist, a doctor who can take your pain away. If you've had pain your entire life, and that pain, you always talk about how much you're in pain, it's genuinely your identity, you will actually refuse to get that help, or that help it doesn't have to be verbatim, but you won't, you'll reject the help because you don't know how you are or who you are without that pain. So it's almost like, if I wasn't talking about my pain all day, what would I be doing? And it doesn't, when you say it out loud, you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense at all. But like, we see it everywhere.
Exactly. It's just like a young adult that I was working with, and they said to me, I have anxiety. I get anxious. And I said, okay, under what circumstances do you get anxious? And they thought, think about it. What triggers your anxiety? And long story short, it ended up being that when their bank account goes down, like when they see their bank account go down to a certain level, they start to get anxious. And I said to them, that's everybody. We all will get anxious when those situations happen. So for you, what you need to do is to have savings as your priority. So every time you get paid, you put this amount in savings. You don't touch it once it gets there, because that is what triggers your anxiety. They've never had anxiety again.
Yeah.
I said, you've got to manage it. You've got it, right? So it's just like if we lose, when we lose our jobs and we've got, mortgage payment, 3 mouths sitting there to feed, you think we don't go into anxiety? Absolutely, we're anxious, right?
Yeah.
But once we then go and manage it, then we are okay to cope. So I get worried when we suddenly compartmentalize people who are displaying normal reactions to certain things. Is about driving their awareness on what pushes them into that state, and teaching them how to avoid that state, because they now know their body reacts to it.
Yeah. And even understanding like what, to play off of that, like, what is this trying to tell me? Because those feelings, those are very primal instincts. So anxiety, for instance, or fear is like fear of getting attacked by a tiger from like, years ago. But so it's being able to identify in that moment, okay, I'm afraid, but afraid of what? And then does that make, then like working through that, because you can avoid it and pivot, but sometimes it'll still stay there. You know what I mean? So trying to work through and really pinpoint what is the actual source of this, and how can I work through it. So if you're
not try, and don't get me wrong, Zeina, it's about also making sure they don't come to you in this state of feeling less than, because they're saying I'm having anxiety, or because I had a mental health moment, or you know what I mean? It's them just coming to share, having a safe space that they can share what they're going through and work it through without being labeled that you're less than, because suddenly you're in the mental health compartment.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I always say to people, when I watched George Floyd, I went and I watched George Floyd because my mom called me in a state, and I was like, what got her in a state? And she's telling me, and I'm like, I shut down media, right? So I went on the internet searching for whatever she was telling me. And when I saw what happened, I wish I hadn't seen it, but when I did, I wrote to an article saying to people, I never really focused on my mental health till this moment because it really impacted me watching that. It doesn't mean I'm I have a mental health. It just means a particular thing triggered that because I couldn't believe it was real.
Yeah.
Right? It's just like watching 911 when the buildings, you're like, what the hell, is that for real or is this a movie?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you deal with the aftermath of that. And once you understand what triggered it, you can now cope and correct and deal and all those sorts of things. So that's where I was coming from. But one of the things, so I don't want people to think I don't respect that. I absolutely do. One of the things I want to talk to you about is self-healing journey. So what is the self-healing journey that you have, and how do you guide that? I love journey, by the word. I love the word journey. I think we're
Oh
all
gosh.
journey. So
Oh,
I love it.
it's always a journey. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're never at the end of it, right? So a lot of my work is, I think we go through life and we're constantly changing things around us, right? So we move to a different state, we move schools, we change jobs, we change partners. But a lot of times, even though we do that and we may be happier in the moment, if we have something inherently inside, like limiting beliefs or fears or things like that, they're going to continue to surface for the most part. They may show up differently in different relationships and different environments, but it's really important to go back and heal those parts of ourselves that are wounded, that were wounded when we were children. So going through that process, a lot of times it's called shadow work, inner child healing. But it's really important to be aware, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier. When you feel upset, instead of medicating or going and doing, numbing, whether it's, you can numb by, some people numb with drugs, it's alcohol, like TV, just anything that your mind isn't thinking about your recent breakup or whatever it is.
Right.
That's numbing. You're not dealing with those feelings. So the more that you're able to sit with those feelings and work through it, the less you'll have to work on in the future. But if you kind of just shut down and you don't talk to anyone and you internalize everything, you could last for quite some time doing that potentially. But after a while, it's going to start trickling out because you've carried all this baggage for so long. It becomes way too much for you to carry. So you might start, having emotional outbursts. Someone asks you like, what do you want for dinner, sweetheart? And you freak out for no reason. It's not about that exact situation. It's about other, maybe you always feel misunderstood, or maybe you're freaking out because you think your partner should know what you want, but you've never communicated with them. You're afraid to communicate because you're afraid of losing them. Like there's so many different things to unpack and unravel. And it gets to be quite complicated the more we hold on to these things. So the more we're able to kind of observe and be curious in the moment and not constantly shy away from, oh, I'm upset today, I have to just get over it. I have to just go out and play and act like everything's,
the facade, the wonderful facade.
Yeah. I mean,
and
exactly, because it's only hurting you in the long run. Obviously, there's certain situations you kind of do have to put on a strong face and everything, but you owe it to yourself to work on, constantly be looking within and thinking, what do I need? Where am I not speaking up? Like if I constantly feel like nobody understands me, am I speaking?
But sorry to interrupt, Zeina, but I love what you're saying, but how do you get the person to actually accept that that's what they're doing? Because I know in my coaching, I find they hang so hard onto their story and their victimization and their, like some people would say whining. They hang so hard onto it. How do you as a coach trigger them to really understand that that's what they're doing and they need to change? Because I get a lot of protests from that. And I work at the neuroscience level, and there's a lot of, they want to hold on to that story because they've been holding on to it for years. and it's the way they excuse their, what they're doing. So how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, one big thing just going into some of the deeper healing work is I ask my clients, are you ready to let go of this? And some of them, initially they'll say, oh, I want to release myself from whatever. And then when you start getting into the work, you ask them that point blank, and some of them just say no, or some part of them is holding them back from that. If you're, I do this what's called shadow integrations, very similar to internal family systems from like the therapeutic standpoint, but we develop little parts of ourselves, right? Like if you ever say,
yes, yeah,
part of me wants to do this, but the other part doesn't, we develop internally these systems and these mechanisms to keep us safe. So even though we really want to maybe participate in a play or be an actor or a speaker, there could be a part of us that's like, no, you can't do that because it's dangerous. And what if people don't like you? And what if you get booed? And so that's what kind of keeps you small.
So how do you bring those parts together? Because in my work in neuro-linguistic, we bring those parts together. How do you do that?
Yeah. I'm also trained in neuro-linguistic
Okay. So
Yeah. So the parts have to want it. You can't, when you're working with a client, as much we as coaches, as healers, as family members and support members want to help our friends and our family members heal, we can't do that for them. So the first step is that they have to be willing to want to let it go, and have that awareness and start being open to what are the other possibilities, and also thinking of the alternative and reframing for them, like, okay, you want to hold on to this victim mentality. What is that doing for you?
Right.
How is that serving you? Because maybe a lot of times that protecting mechanism, that part did have a role. It had a role early on to keep them safe, but as they've evolved, that part doesn't even realize that they're no longer a child that needs to be like held safe. So that part needs to be, reassigned or do something else, like given another task, because it no longer makes sense. They're actually harming, the individual as opposed to helping them, which was their initial intention.
Intention, exactly.
Yeah. So it's really about, the person themselves, you really just can't force this, and it's a process. And that's why it's really helpful to work alongside someone with this. And you can do some of it if you're very into this type of work. You can do some of it potentially by yourself, but to have a practitioner like a coach work alongside, because they can also see things extra, like, from an outside view, and help you pinpoint different angles and reframe, because it's a little challenging sometimes when we're very in it to see what's really going on,
Awesome. And the last thing I'm going to ask you before we wrap up, and then I'm going to do a rapid fire with you to close off. I love it. What I want to ask you is, how do you make everyone, like, how do they know they're healing? How do you get them to recognize? Is it changing their behavior, the actions they take? How do you let them know they're healing?
Yeah, so I do get this question quite a bit, and also kind of the impatience of like, well, nothing's working, or I got in the same situation again. Like, you'll continue to be, as you start to heal and draw awareness and start healing these parts of yourself, you will be, presented with different tests or whatever you want to call them that will see, have you actually integrated these parts? Have you truly started, in the very least, to heal? And you'll start seeing the way that you show up is different. The process, you'll know. To me, I always tell people, like, I have clients that cry in the sessions and then they'll apologize and try to hold it in. I'm like, like, you let it all out.
Exactly.
Like any type of emotion, any like redness or anything like that, we usually tend to stifle it. So letting it out is a release. It's your body letting go of that stagnant energy that they've held on to, like going back to that, that visual of a person holding,
and letting them know those feelings are very valid.
Yeah.
Right. Let them know it's very valid, right? But release it.
Because the feelings are they're telling you something, right? So like a lot of times for me, I know if I get emotional, like a lot of times when I'm speaking about something that I'm passionate about, I'll get goosebumps, or like I'll almost feel like I might cry. And to me, that's very indicative of you're doing what you're meant to be doing. Like I'm literally getting goosebumps right now. You're doing what you're meant to be doing. You're helping who you're meant to help. So it's indicative of like there is something here to be looked at, whether it's good or bad. So also just the way that they show up. So maybe they lacked confidence or they didn't feel like they were ever using their voice. So starting to take note of, maybe for this week, set a goal of yourself to say, actually, I'd like to go to this restaurant this week, or just mini goals that they feel like are achievable, and then start looking backwards as to what steps that they took, because that will help to, keep the momentum going of, yeah, maybe you didn't decline a huge offer, but you told 5 people no, you didn't want to join them in whatever event or activity because you weren't interested. And sometimes it's just doing those little things repeatedly that will build that muscle for you to start saying no to bigger things and setting boundaries or whatever it is that you're working on. So understanding, like seeing how you're showing up in the situations, which you may not notice in the moment, but being able to reflect back, like by journaling or having a conversation.
And those are some of the things you task them with.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so now as we move into wrap up, I'm going to do a rapid fire. I'm doing that with all my guests to end, and then we'll go and let you get a chance to speak to the audience and let them know where to find you and everything. But with the rapid fire, I'm going to throw words at you, and the first thing that comes to your mind, don't try and explain it, just the first thing that comes to your mind. And I know you know this because of NLP, so you're going to do it right. So the first word is my own word. It's a unique word, so you wouldn't have heard it, but it gives everybody a feeling when I say it. Divine-tastical.
Heart, like soul, heart led.
All right. Mindset.
I'm just trying to think of words to put words.
No, what comes to mind? Come on. You know that's just mindset.
Your thoughts create your reality.
Gratitude.
Happiness.
This one's just to mess you up. Wowzy.
Excitement.
Yeah, life.
Happiness again.
Purpose.
Fulfillment.
Feedback.
Feedback is feedback. I guess data points.
And this one is unique to you. Everybody gets their own unique one. Congruency.
Oh, I love that. It's like a feeling of like, I don't want to say ease necessarily, but it's very natural and authentic. Authentic, definitely.
Oh, love it. I was thinking euphoria.
Yeah.
So on that note, tell me, what do you want? You have a chance to talk to the audience. What do you want them to know about you? Where can they find you? It's your plug. Go.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, I would love to connect with any of your audience members if they have any questions or are interested in coaching. I do one-on-one sessions right now, and they can find me at C-Rock Coaching. I'm on all social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. It's SEAROCK Coaching. So they can give me a follow there. I'm usually the most active on Instagram and LinkedIn. And then also, if anyone is interested in kind of doing a little bit of starting on their inward journey, and getting some clarity there, especially as it relates to what they want to do, like as a job, as a profession, or a business, they can head over to my website, crockcoaching.com/freebie, and they can download a free workbook, which will kind of give them some little prompts on what to think about, as we discussed.
Awesome. So thank you. On that note, thank you, Zeina, for joining me. It's been a pleasure talking to you and just evaluating all the stuff about healing. And on the note, as everybody knows, from my heart to yours, thank you for listening to another episode of Arrays of Living.
Yes.